Welcome to our channel Crime Loom, the place where true crime stories come alive. No one suspected him. He walked the same streets as everyone else. He smiled. He worked. He lived quietly. For years, a city lived in fear, while a serial killer hid in plain sight. Police chased shadows. Evidence vanished. Then, after years of silence, the killer made one mistake. He wrote a letter. Not a threat, not a confession, but a message he believed would prove how smart he was. Instead, that letter became the key that exposed him. One word, one habit, one fatal error. This is the true story of how a single letter revealed a serial killer and ended a mystery that haunted a city for years. The city looked calm to anyone who only saw it from the outside. Cars moved through the streets every morning. Shops opened on time. People followed their daily routines without thinking much about danger. Children walked to school, workers rushed to offices, and lights turned on in windows every night. Life appeared normal, but beneath this calm surface, fear had lived quietly for a long time. It stayed hidden in small habits, in careful glances, and in the way people locked their doors twice before sleeping. Someone had been killing, and no one knew who he was. The first murder shocked the city, but many believed it was an isolated crime. People talked about it for a few days, then slowly returned to their lives. The second murder brought fear. By the third, panic began to spread. News reports filled television screens. Conversations changed in cafes and offices. Parents warned their children to be careful. The victims were strangers to one another. They lived in different neighborhoods, had different jobs, and lived very different lives. Some were young, some were old. Some lived alone, while others lived with family. There was no clear connection. Police searched desperately for a pattern. They examined locations, times, and methods. They compared victims' backgrounds and routines. Nothing connected. Each crime scene felt clean, controlled, and carefully planned. The killer left very little behind. No fingerprints that could be matched. No usable DNA. Witnesses remembered sounds, shadows, or movement, but never a clear face. It was as if the killer understood exactly how investigations worked. Detectives worked day and night. They filled rooms with photographs, maps, and timelines. Red lines crossed city maps. Notes covered whiteboards. Coffee cups piled up on desks. Officers followed every tip from the public, even the weakest ones. They knocked on doors. They questioned friends, neighbors, coworkers, and strangers. Every interview ended the same way. No answers. No clear direction. As months passed, frustration grew. Officers stared at walls covered in evidence, hoping tired eyes would notice something new. They replayed crime scenes again and again in their minds. Some believed the killer was highly intelligent and planned every move carefully. Others believed he was simply lucky. Either way, the result was the same. He remained invisible. Every new lead ended in silence, and every silence made the fear heavier. The pressure affected everyone. Detectives slept poorly. Some became distant from their families. Others grew quiet and withdrawn. Each unsolved murder felt personal. Faces of victims stayed in their minds long after shifts ended. The city demanded answers, but there were none to give. Years passed, and the case slowly grew cold. New detectives joined the department and studied the files with fresh eyes. They hoped to see something others had missed. They reviewed reports late into the night, but they reached the same dead ends. Some officers retired without ever seeing justice. Others transferred, unable to carry the emotional weight of failure. The investigation became a reminder of what happens when evil leaves no trace. Then the killings stopped at first. No one trusted the silence. Weeks passed without another victim, then months, then years. Slowly, people began to relax. Parents worried less. Businesses stayed open later. Neighborhoods felt safer. Some believed the killer had died. Others believed he had moved away. Some thought he had been arrested for another crime under a different name, but a small group of investigators believed something darker, They believed the killer had not vanished. They believed he was still there, living quietly among ordinary people, watching, waiting, enjoying the fact that he had never been caught. To them, the silence felt intentional, not accidental. The case files were moved into storage. Dust gathered on folders filled with unanswered questions. The city tried to forget, but memory does not disappear easily. Every unexplained sound at night, every news report about violence elsewhere brought the fear back for a moment. The killer had taken lives, but he had also taken peace. Then, one quiet morning, everything changed. A letter arrived at a local newspaper office. The envelope was plain. No return address. No threatening symbols. Just neat handwriting and a simple stamp. It sat among ordinary mail, unnoticed at first. Inside was a single page of paper, folded carefully. The editor opened it without concern. That feeling did not last. He read the letter once, then again. With every line, a sense of fear grew stronger. His hands felt cold as he reached the final sentence. He knew immediately that this was different from anything he had seen before. The letter talked about the murders, not like a reporter, not like someone guessing. The writer mentioned details never released to the public. The exact time police arrived at certain scenes, the position of one victim's body, a small personal item taken from another victim that had never appeared in the news. These details were too accurate to ignore. The tone of the letter was calm, almost polite. There was no anger, no apology, no fear. The writer sounded confident and in control, as if he was reminding the world that he still existed and had never been caught. It did not read like a threat. It read like a message meant to be noticed. The editor contacted the police immediately. When detectives read the letter, the room fell silent. Everyone understood the same truth at the same moment. This was not a hoax. This was not a copycat. This was the person they had been hunting for years. After a long silence, the killer had finally chosen to speak. The letter was treated carefully. It was photographed, copied, and locked away. Specialists were called in. Handwriting experts studied the shape and pressure of each letter. Linguists examined sentence structure and word choice. Psychologists searched for emotional clues hidden between the lines. Every word mattered. One conclusion became clear. The writer wanted attention. He felt forgotten. The letter was not a confession, but it was a challenge. A quiet message saying that he was still in control and that the past was not as buried as everyone hoped. Then someone noticed something small. One word in the letter was spelled in an unusual way. Not incorrect, but uncommon. A variation often used only in certain regions. This was not a random mistake. It was a habit. Something learned and repeated over time. That single word changed everything. After the discovery of the unusual spelling in the letter, investigators focused their full attention on it. Linguists explained that such habits are deeply rooted. Even when people try to hide who they are, these small patterns often remain. The way someone spells a word, chooses a phrase, or builds a sentence can reveal where they learned language and how they think. This was no random error. It was a clue left behind without meaning to. Police began a slow and exhausting search through old records. They reviewed handwritten police reports, job applications, housing forms, and personal letters collected during earlier stages of the investigation. Thousands of documents were checked. Most led nowhere. Many officers felt the process was hopeless, but investigators continued, knowing that the smallest detail had already brought them further than years of guessing ever had. While that work continued, forensic experts examined the paper used for the letter. It was not common printer paper. It had a certain weight and texture that stood out. After testing and comparison, they identified the brand. It was sold in only a few local stores. This narrowed the search further. Detectives visited each store one by one. Most owners remembered nothing unusual. But at one small shop, something changed. The owner paused when shown the paper. He remembered a man who bought it regularly. The man came alone. He was polite and quiet. He paid in cash and avoided conversation. He never caused problems. He never stayed long. The description sounded harmless, almost boring. That was what made it unsettling. Police began looking at the area around the shop. They reviewed nearby apartments and houses. One building stood out. It was clean and quiet, the kind of place people never noticed. One man lived alone there. He had a steady job. He paid rent on time. He had no criminal record. Neighbors described him as friendly but private. He smiled. He said hello. He kept to himself. His name felt familiar to some investigators. Years earlier, during the early stages of the case, his name had appeared briefly. At the time, there was nothing strong enough to continue. No evidence. No reason to suspect him further. Now, everything felt different. Surveillance began quietly. Officers followed him at a distance. They documented his routine. He left for work at the same time every morning. He returned home in the evening. He shopped alone. He took long walks at night. He never met anyone. He never drew attention. Days passed. Then weeks. Nothing illegal happened. Nothing suspicious appeared. Doubt returned to the investigation. Some detectives wondered if they were wrong again. The man looked ordinary. His life was simple. There were no signs of violence. No strange behavior. The silence felt heavy. But investigators remembered the letter. They remembered the spelling. They stayed patient. Then, one night, they searched his trash. Inside the bags were ordinary things. Food packaging. Old receipts. Broken household items. Then they found something folded inside an envelope. A piece of paper. When they unfolded it, their hearts raced. It was a draft of the letter. The wording was slightly different. But the structure was the same. The tone was the same. And there it was again. The same unusual spelling. The killer had practiced writing the letter. He had revised it, and then he had thrown it away. This was the mistake. Police immediately requested a search warrant. Early the next morning, officers approached the apartment quietly. They knocked on the door. The man opened it calmly. He looked surprised, but not afraid. He did not resist. Inside, the apartment appeared normal. Clean furniture. Organized shelves. Everything in its place. At first, nothing seemed wrong, but as officers searched deeper, the truth began to surface. Inside drawers and boxes, they found items that did not belong there. Jewelry, watches, small personal objects, items that matched descriptions from victims' families. There were photographs as well. Not random photos. Photos taken from a distance. Photos of people who never knew they were being watched. They also found notebooks. Page after page was filled with writing. Thoughts, plans, reflections. Some pages described daily routines. Others described feelings of control and power. He wrote about blending into society. He wrote about how invisible he felt. He wrote about how the city changed after each murder. There were also letters. Many letters he never sent. These letters were darker than the ones sent to the newspaper. They were more honest. He described how he felt when the city was afraid. He enjoyed knowing people locked their doors without knowing why. He wrote about watching life return to normal after each killing. He believed this made him smarter than everyone else. The man was arrested quietly. News spread quickly. Television screens filled with his face. The city reacted with shock. People stared at the images, trying to understand how this ordinary man could hide something so dark. He was the man people passed on the street. The man who smiled politely. The man no one ever suspected. That realization frightened everyone. During interrogation, he remained calm. He answered questions slowly. He denied everything at first. His voice was steady. His posture relaxed. He acted as if nothing had changed. But when detectives placed the letter in front of him, something shifted. His eyes paused. His expression changed. For just a moment, that moment told investigators everything. He knew the truth was exposed. He confessed slowly. Not with tears. Not with anger. Just words. The game was over. The control he believed he had was gone. The letter that was meant to remind the world of his power had become the thing that destroyed him. After the confession, the city entered a strange silence. For years, fear had been loud. It lived in news reports, police sirens, and worried conversations. Now that the killer was in custody, the noise faded. But silence brought its own weight. People struggled to understand how someone so ordinary had hidden something so dark for so long. The arrest answered many questions, but it also created new ones that no one could fully explain. The investigation did not end with the confession. Detectives knew confessions could be incomplete or misleading. They returned to old case files and compared every detail with what the man had said. They revisited crime scenes, rechecked evidence, and spoke again with families of the victims. Slowly, the truth became clearer. His words matched the facts. His memories aligned with timelines only the killer could know. There was no doubt left. As the case moved toward trial, prosecutors prepared carefully. They understood that the story itself was powerful, but power was not enough. Every claim had to be supported. Every detail had to be proven. The letter became the heart of the case. It was the moment everything changed. It was the mistake that ended years of mystery. Experts were brought in to explain how the letter exposed the killer. Linguists prepared to testify about spelling habits and language patterns. Handwriting analysts practiced explaining complex ideas in simple terms. Forensic specialists reviewed the paper, ink, and drafts found in the trash. Everything needed to be clear to a jury with no background in criminal psychology. When the trial began, the courtroom was filled every day. Reporters lined the walls. Cameras waited outside. Inside, families of the victims sat quietly, many holding photographs of loved ones they had lost years earlier. Some had waited a long time for this moment. Others had stopped believing it would ever come. The accused man sat calmly at the defense table. He wore simple clothes. His posture was relaxed. His face showed little emotion. To anyone who did not know his story, he looked like an ordinary person facing an ordinary legal problem. That image disturbed many people in the room. They had expected something darker, something more obvious. The prosecution began by telling the story slowly. They described the city before the murders. They spoke about fear, confusion, and years of unanswered questions. They reminded the jury how the killer had disappeared, leaving the city to wonder if justice would ever come. Then they introduced the letter. The courtroom grew quiet as the letter was read aloud. Every word felt heavy. Jurors listened closely as details were explained. The prosecutor showed how information in the letter had never been shared with the public. They explained why this mattered. They explained how the calm tone suggested confidence, not fear. They showed how the letter was not written by someone seeking help, but by someone seeking recognition. Then experts took the stand. A linguist explained how spelling habits form early in life. They described how people rarely change these habits, even when trying to hide. They pointed out the unusual spelling in the letter and showed how it appeared again in drafts found in the suspect's trash. The connection was clear. The mistake was small, but it was powerful. A handwriting analyst followed. They explained how pressure, spacing, and letter shapes matched between the letter and other writings found in the apartment. They showed enlarged images to the jury, highlighting similarities. The evidence was quiet, but convincing. Forensic specialists explained the paper. They described how it was traced to a small group of stores. They explained how the suspect's purchasing habits matched the timeline. Each expert added another piece to the puzzle. Finally, detectives testified. They described surveillance, the search of the trash, and the moment the draft was discovered. They explained how that discovery changed everything. They spoke about the search of the apartment and the items found inside. Personal items from victims. Notebooks filled with thoughts and plans. Letters never sent. The defense tried to challenge the evidence. They suggested coincidence. They questioned methods. They argued that language analysis was not exact science, but the pattern was too strong, too consistent. To complete, throughout the trial, the accused man remained quiet. He did not react when evidence was shown. He did not look at the families. He did not show anger or regret. That silence made many people uncomfortable. It felt calculated, controlled. When it was time for the verdict, the courtroom held its breath. The jury found him guilty, life in prison, no chance of release. The sentence ended years of uncertainty. It ended the question of who had done it. But it did not end the pain. Families cried. Some hugged each other. Some sat still, staring forward. Justice could not return what was lost, but it brought answers. For many, that was the first step toward healing. Outside the courthouse, the city reacted with a mix of relief and disbelief. People talked about the case everywhere, on television, on the radio, in homes and workplaces. They replayed the story again and again. How the killer lived among them, how he smiled, how he blended in, how one letter destroyed his secret. Psychologists spoke publicly about the case. They explained why some killers seek attention after years of silence. They explained how control can become addictive. They described how arrogance often leads to mistakes. The letter was not written out of carelessness. It was written out of pride. The city slowly began to change. Fear faded, but it did not disappear completely. People still remembered. They still checked locks, but they slept more peacefully. Streets felt safer. Life returned to routine. Detectives reflected on the case quietly. Some felt relief. Others felt regret. They wondered if the letter could have come sooner, if lives could have been saved. These questions had no answers. They learned to live with them. The case became part of criminal history. Students studied it. Investigators discussed it. The letter was used as an example of how language can reveal identity, of how small details matter, of how no one is as invisible as they believe. The man spent his days in prison, away from the city he once controlled through fear. The attention he wanted had come, but not in the way he imagined. His power was gone, his voice silenced. For the city, the lesson remained. Evil does not always look frightening. Sometimes it looks ordinary. Sometimes it lives quietly next door. Sometimes it smiles and says hello, and sometimes, after years of silence, evil makes one mistake. A letter, a single word, and everything ends. The killer is gone, but the story remains. A city learned that danger does not always look frightening. Sometimes it looks normal. Sometimes it smiles and says hello. This case showed how one small detail can expose even the most careful criminal. A single word, a single habit, a single mistake. Justice did not come quickly, but it did come. And the truth finally gave the victims a voice. Because no matter how long evil hides, it always leaves something behind. For watching more amazing videos like this, subscribe our channel Crime Loom.